It's so very good to be back here, back in the Buddha Hall with all the windows open. On this beautiful, clear, sunny, breezy, bird-filled Sunday morning. This person wishes to offer her apologies for imposing and inconveniencing staff and Sangha with an injured foot. Stupid thing to do. The teacher is away on a few weeks vacation. One can expect she'll return standing on her own 2 feet instead of on 2 aluminum sides. Shows one shouldn't expect anything of anybody, including oneself. Well, this will pass very soon. It's nothing serious at all. At the end of the last on period, some people asked whether there couldn't be Teisho again on the 4 vows. And if one remembers correctly, during the last question and answer period, the group instruction period, there was one person who said something like this: I used to recite these vows with so much enthusiasm, so much energy, and now I don't know. Could you say something about the 4 vows again? We will. Don't know how far we'll get, whether we'll get beyond the first vow. There are quite a few materials in connection with this, one of them being this recent bulletin from the Rochester Buddhist Peace Fellowship, which offers many questions to consider. And of course we will, if there's time, this time or next time, read the 6 patriarchs' words on the 4 vows. The first vow being the way it is recited here: all beings without number I vow to liberate. All beings without number I vow to liberate. How does one recite those vows? How does one recite this vow? Let's all work on this together. Not just listening to this person here, to the words, but to look into oneself about what is being said now and when one recites those vows. To find out not how one should recite or would like to recite or ought to recite, but how does one recite? It takes really very deep awareness and attention and interest, all-consuming interest. How one acts. And not the minute, the instant one discovers something, to immediately, if it is not what one thinks one ought to discover, shove it aside, not look at it. Criticize it, ignore it, or rationalize it, but to see it for what it is. Does one recite mechanically? Not really aware of what one is saying? Or does one recite because one thinks one ought to recite in such a way as a man, woman, Buddhist, Zen person, Rochester person? Or a reactionary to all that? How? I can't tell you. You got to find out yourself. Are there deep doubts when one recites this? Like this one woman saying, now I don't really know. Many beginning people, beginning with their practice, bring this question up very freely. What a presumptuous thing I'm saying there. I vow to deliver all sentient beings. Don't even know what it is to liberate myself. I'm in bondage. I'm caught, stuck in a groove. How can I vow to save all sentient beings? There's so many of them. Never decreasing problems. What does one say? I will and I must. No matter what this means. Or does one recite freely, not knowing what it means, but with a real urgency to find out whether there's anything to this or whether this is a hoax? Who is this I that vows? Can one shed the light of awareness on this I that vows? The feelings involved. Emotionalism maybe, sentimentality, romanticism. Feelings of heroism. I'm not saying this is so. You look. Or indifference. Numbness. Feeling I mustn't think about these things, one can't think about that. What is this I? We used to say we, I, we, I, or something like that. Right now it's I. But it doesn't make much difference because the we becomes the I. If one strongly identifies with a group, with a movement, then this is just a new I. One assumes the identity of the group, the country. We'll go into that later. Or is there a real feeling of loss, of modesty, of humility? One recites because this is what's being done here. And yet there's no real understanding of this and no real presumption that one understands. Who are the others? All these others, all beings without number, who are they? They are, well, it depends. Does one have ideas of who they are? Depends on how oneself lives. If one lives totally consumed in self-concern, no matter what that self-concern is, for self-satisfaction, no matter what that satisfaction is, it can be helping others. It can generate a tremendous amount of self-satisfaction and identity and pride. Not necessarily so, but most of the time it does. Then these others are abstract ideas out there, people that I have to help, people that are in misery. They're ideas. Even though can be very vivid ideas of the El Salvadorians, Argentinians, Irish people, English people, American people, Southern, Northern, Ku Klux Klan, the Lebanese, the Syrians, the Palestinians, the Jews, the Russians, the Poles, the Chinese, the Japanese, Vietnamese. If there's no all-consuming self-concern, and if there is not that, there is love and compassion that takes the place, then one can see people for what they are, not for the idea one has of them, as being pitiable, or superior, or this or that. One sees them as they are, and you know what they are? They're no other than yourself. Then this vow is a completely new thing. It's not me for you. It's all of us. This question of helping others is such a tremendously deeply rooted and emotion-ridden, fear-ridden, pride-ridden, ambition-ridden issue. In terms of what was going on here in this Buddhist fellowship, it took the form of this whole question of political activism or social activism. I don't know whether or not to start with a letter here before we go into this. A letter just handed to me a while ago, found while cleaning out some files. It's dated October 28th, 1973. To the editor of Zenbo, written by a then member of the center. It was a physicist, a woman physicist. Said many sessions together. Remember her well. She says, I wish to share with the Sangha my impressions from a recent visit with the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk who was what was viewed with our way of viewing things as a real activist, a Buddhist activist in Vietnam. One must be very careful always how one sees people from a different culture, because even though we're all the same in our basic drives and fears and hopes and sorrow, yet we all have been conditioned differently. We must be very cautious in applying our conditioning to others, which means one must become aware of one's own, absolutely. One is not aware, then one is not aware, and one sees through tinted glasses or distorted glasses. Thich Nhat Hanh, what was most impressive to this person in reading his poetry was that there was never any word of communism or this or that. These were all human beings. And there was helping going on, doing what was needed. Whether they were communists, northerners or southerners, what difference does it make? When recently the president was shot and somebody called up the center asking, couldn't we have a chanting service for the president? Why not for the person who shot him? I wish to share with the Sangha my impressions from a recent visit with the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. The occasion was a stopover in Paris. Thich Nhat Hanh was in exile and was working then out of some kind of a committee or organization from Paris. On my way to a physics conference in Strasbourg, to which I had been invited by the European Physical Society. The date was Saturday, September 8. I was received by Thich Nhat Hanh and Miss Huang, who said little but brought in tea and some Vietnamese delicacies, rice cookies and dried bananas. I was impressed by the directness and simplicity of this man, And of course, with many of us, I had been deeply moved by his poetry and writing. The first question I asked Nhat Hanh was in regard to whether Buddhists should or should not be activists. I was motivated by the controversy reflected in the letters section of Zenbo. We had published some material of Thich Nhat Hanh and received a whole spectrum of replies, which is always the case. There's always a spectrum of opinions, as long as they're opinions. Opinions come in spectrums. You must never expect it to be any different. The minute you voice an opinion, you're going to be attacked or agreed with. When you're agreed with, of course, you feel good. He's my friend. And also my own concern over having done so little to help. Nhat Hanh said that a true Buddhist doesn't think activist or not. True Buddhist doesn't think activist or not. He simply responds to situations according to his own awareness. The conversation then turned to Buddhism in the West. He felt that we must develop our own version of Buddhism based on Western traditions. Why does it have to be based on Western tradition? On any tradition, for that matter. Questioning it. He mentioned that he had been touched by hearing the tapes of the chanting in Rochester, but I had the impression that he felt this to be imitative, though he didn't come right out and say that. I thought he meant religious traditions and made some attempts at finding parallels in recent trends of Western religion. But Nhat Hanh said that he thought that Western science is where acceptance of Buddhist ideas should come. Interesting, isn't it? Amazing. He said that he uses words like God in talking to Westerners, but for true Buddhism, God, the absolute, the ground of being, even Buddha nature, even nothingness, are concepts, and as such have no real significance. The scientist's rejection of the supernatural and of God and gods, and the seeking after truth is, he felt, very important. And he also mentioned scientific explanations of some features of meditation. Here, the scientific way meaning an objective, factual way, not tainted by what one wants to find, what one fears what one will find, and always ready to throw out the hypothesis if it does not hold, and not to use superstition, belief in magic. I said that I had certainly thought that, but I had been bothered by what seemed like supernatural things in Buddhism, heavens and hells, for example. Thich Nhat Hanh said simply, Buddhism is an ocean. You can take what you need from it. And of course, you know, as the Buddha said, throw it away when the raft has no longer any use. Don't cling to it. make a new edifice out of it that binds you and others? He then picked up a teacup and said it is easy to argue from Buddhism or from science, for that matter, that it doesn't exist. As here. That is to reduce it to nothingness. But the cup does exist. And if one really understands in what sense just one teacup exists, one understands Buddhism. One can say in what sense one human being exists, lives. In what way? If one thoroughly understands that, one understands all sentient beings. And maybe in that seeing, in that understanding, there is a way of going beyond. Not beyond life or beyond human beings, but beyond prejudice and images and ideas and dogmas, and traditions. Thich Nhat Hanh said many other things, but the above is what remained impressed upon me. I came away much enriched and determined to understand about that teacup someday. The best way always being to understand it right now, not to postpone it. There's nothing to postpone, there's only now. Future is an idea, convenient idea for postponement. So, should Buddhists be active, politically active or not? What is political or social activism? First of all, this question just hit this person very recently. Why do we divide up our activities into social activities, political activities, Buddhist activities, daily activities, work activities, sleep activities? Why? Thinking in those terms is the division. And the thinking about it is the division. And as long as there's this division, we'll make one mistake after another. And then we'll try to become active to correct those mistakes. What is social activism? Is that something different from relating to you and talking and walking and shopping, taking care of children, of the house, of work, with people? Isn't that social activism? It's always relationship among people, isn't it? When you go out to show a slideshow about the effects, the devastating, disastrous, appalling effects of nuclear weaponry or nuclear power, if misused, to people, are you abolishing nuclear power? Or are you talking to people? You're talking to people, aren't you? And why are you talking to people about this? must be seen. You must probe into this. You must not slur over that. A very essential ingredient in that conversation is why you talk to them. As Nathan says, doing what needs to be done out of awareness. This awareness is no ordinary thing. I see you sitting there on the sofa and I'll show you my slides. Why am I here? What brought me here? To see one's fears of that nuclear power, of that destruction, one's fear of death, of being maimed, one's fear of not doing anything important with one's life, wanting to do something important, wanting to be important, one's discomfort with the guilt feelings of not doing something important. And always away from those feelings into something, rather than dealing with those feelings, allowing them to reveal themselves. Guilt, fear. Maybe one's boredom with life. One's ideas of what a fulfilled life should be. And to look whether this is not just an idea. Trying to fulfill oneself. Who is that self? What is that self that one is trying to fulfill? Or what is that self that is trying to fulfill itself? Is that separate from this person that sits there in the living room to whom I'm showing the slides? Or can I just see that person there? Not me seeing, but there is this person. Does that person really want to hear? Maybe the person will be captured by a slideshow which shows horrible things. And I'm now playing on that person's fears and emotions and urging, longings for security. And if this is sufficiently aroused, that person will sign a petition. Obviously, because one doesn't want that to happen. The trouble is, after me, somebody may ring the doorbell, comes from another camp. Some kind of anti-communist camp, showing a slideshow of Russians, what they've done during their revolution, how they're subverting the whole world. This myth is being built up right now. Maybe it's not a myth, but it's built up like one. Any revolution that's happening in South America doesn't happen because people there are starving and being suppressed and subjugated, but because communists are agitating there. So here this person sits in the living room after me and shows all these horrid pictures of what Russians have done in the past and are doing now. Not just Russians, but communists. And then throwing in a few slides of what the Americans have done. And dropping this bomb. No, this person, I don't know. It's very confusing. No, this person wouldn't show slides of what the Americans have done, not only what the others have done. And impressing upon this victim there, sitting there, that we must have more bombs to keep the Russians out, because if we don't, the Russians will take us. Because this is what's going on right now. We're being propagandized about the danger of the Russians taking over, and we need to arm. And 80% of American people are in favor of more defense. So if I need to speak to people, what do I need to speak about? Or do I go into people's home and speak to them about it? Depends on the subject I'm going to talk about. I try to find out what is the cause of building bombs. Why do we build bombs? Why do we need a defensive arsenal? Why do we need to put, we always call it defensive. It's every weapon is what it is. It's a weapon to be used. Why do we put weapons all over the world? What's at the basis of this? What's at the basis of fighting? Isn't it always identification with a country? The Americans versus the Russians, the Irish versus the English, the Catholics versus the Protestants, Jews versus the Muslims, Arabs, Muslims versus the Hindus. And these are just the big categories. They're little religions. They're all fighting each other. The instant one is identified with a group, what happens? One downgrades the others. One sets oneself by one notch or many notches separate from others. Because one's so afraid to stand alone, one enjoys the security that this new group, country, what have you, gives one. And one allows that country to defend one. Because one has asked it to. So, can one talk about the dangers of nationalism to people? Or is that sort of a hot item, a hot issue? One may be branded a communist or something. Is one clear oneself on this whole thing? One must really try to find out, why do we do these things? Why do we build bombs? And if what builds bombs, that underlying cause, is not seen through and eradicated, we'll build them over and over again. Besides, the bombs alone aren't the problem. People torture each other. Very simple instruments. Dissidents. People who don't conform, people who don't agree, people who don't toe the line. Just read on the airplane coming back about a Jewish journalist in Argentina. One day was just taken off the street, clapped into jail and tortured for 2 years. I will not go into the description of how he was tortured. In this day and age, it's happening all over. He had spoken out against the oppressive government of Argentina. Now has written a book. This was a book review. So mustn't one find out what it is within oneself that wants to cling and clutch and depend and pay a price for it? The price of having to take what it takes to defend. Not being able to think independently, but towing the line. So how does one talk to people? Can there be awareness of one's own motives and a clarity in seeing the people? Not as this or that, but human beings. human beings talking to each other without images? Is that possible? If it isn't possible, nothing can be achieved in terms of living peacefully. And this must happen here and now, at your work, on the staff, in the Sangha, in the store, in a family. Can human beings relate to each other without seeing each other in terms of this or that? Without being categorized, labeled, stamped? Under reactions to the meeting was held here a while ago. Most of you may be aware of this. There was a slideshow given on the dangers of nuclear devices. During, but mostly after the meeting, Sangha members brought up questions and issues that may be worthwhile for all of us to consider. Do we, after all, know clearly where we stand with respect to social activism and why we stand there? Well, why we stand there, we were just talking about this. Can one become transparent as to one's motives and be honest? Whether there's a me in there that wants something, a guilty me or some kind of a me. That me always sows seeds of disappointment or satisfaction to which one gets used to, and then one needs to do something new. We're not talking about the need to acquaint oneself with the realities of this world. But are they separate from the realities within oneself? We think they are, but they're not. Because oneself in one's relationship is always bringing this society into being, where we are formed by society and we form a society. And the way we relate on the minutest level affects society. It is society. And to compartmentalize this and say, well, in my relationship with my wife, I'll hope someday I'll understand the teacup. But right now I got to go out and show these slides. It's all one understanding, one work. Penetrates everywhere. If it doesn't, it's no good. Is social activism a disturbing question for us? Is it? If so, why? It says here. Well, we started out saying one must first be clear what social activism is. If one has compartmentalized this as some part of one's life, and if so, why? What is dividing? What is meant here is, if I hear that other people are doing something, I feel very guilty because I'm not doing anything. Then to look into that feeling. Face it, not confront it. Be that. You are that. Can it be understood directly as it comes up and not escaped from into something called social activism? That's just a name. There's nothing that the human being does that is not social activism. Because we affect everyone with every action. Here, briefly, are some of these questions and issues. What are the problems and dangers inherent in activism for people practicing? Now here again is already a category established. What are the dangers for people practicing? Why do we set ourselves apart? Or do we? We're all human beings, all subject to the same basic drives for security, fear of not being secure, fear of being alone, fear of being unloved, abandoned, fear of death, fear of pain, and then all the escapes that come from that, the beliefs, superstitions, the clinging to things, to people, to ideas. We're all the same the world over. Basically. Some people escape into activism, others escape into passivism, as if these are ideas. So this question, what is the danger of social activism for a person practicing? A person practicing is still socially active. Even if you live in a monastery, you're active with the monks or the nuns. There's all kinds of things going on, including politics. As we can already read in the Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch. So how does one respond to each other? Through ideas? I want to get someplace, he's there ahead of me, I want to pass him. I was here first, oh, you know it. You only have to look. And can you look without condemnation, but looking at a human being? So you understand this human being, you can understand it if you condemn it, or put ideal slides in between your vision. And it's one big blur. How possible is it to get caught up in larger causes, larger in quotation mark causes, to the extent that we can't respond to the particulars of our daily lives fully? Actually, if I remember correctly, this question wasn't put exactly in this way. It wasn't referred to particulars of our daily life. It's our daily life, not particulars of it. How I live and negotiate and work with my boss. If I can't make out with him, how can I save this world? If I see him through my angry memories from yesterday, he doesn't have a chance. Neither do I, because I'm caught in memories and fears and the drive for revenge which is in every human being. The word cause here, how possible is it to get up in larger causes? Mind you, this doesn't mean understanding the cause. This word cause is used as a movement or a larger activity. Large is in quotation marks. Because as was pointed out in that meeting, we always want to be, we feel we're doing a little bit better if we're identified with a larger cause. The size of it, the magnitude of it seems to lend some substance to our work, to our effort. We must see that, how ridiculous this is. One person said, when I can cherish the life of one ant, seeing it crawl along the ground there, gathering a little crumb, stumbling and picking up that crumb again and making its way back to the hill, when I can see that without stepping on it, I see it. And there's a tenderness, a feeling for that ant. I need not be shown 100,000 cadavers burnt from the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Magnitude makes no sense in this. it's one human being or one ant. Isn't it? I always want to know, when we hear of a catastrophe, how many people were killed? Oh, just 2? Oh, 60? Or 6,000 in that earthquake? Can one see one human being as all humankind? Then there are no large causes, no small causes. Then there's just seeing and acting appropriately. Not just tackling symptoms, but tackling causes. What causes all this incredible misery and sorrow that we've brought about in this world? What causes it in ourselves? What are these conflicts all about in myself? Can I freely and honestly witness my own violence, anger, without any ideals, without any immediately fleeing into, I shouldn't be this way and I will become better? Hasn't even seen it. One isn't even familiar with it. One is that much more familiar with the violence in others, because there one doesn't look away. There one kind of takes it all in, but also not in an objective way, because it's not clear in oneself. And the eagerness to look at the violence of someone else is not clear, because at the same time the eagerness isn't seen. Or is it seen? It can be seen. Can everything be seen? Honestly. Illumined in the light and energy of awareness, which is not yours or mine. Can we use activist movements to escape from ourselves? We can always try to escape from ourselves, which we do plenty. But we can never escape from ourselves. It always catches up with us. Because what we escape to is no other than ourselves. There's nowhere where we're not. Because there's no division except artificially imposed through thinking in categories, in divisions, in pieces. Zazen activity, social activist activity, home activity, work activity. Can it all become one? One right action coming out of clear seeing and clear thinking. Can we come to feel special or important as Buddhist activists, as Buddhist in quotation mark activists? Look into yourself. Well, this is so. Like Laura, or this person here who wrote the letter, asking Thich Nhat Hanh, what can we as Buddhists do? Why you as Buddhist? Why not you as a human being? You know what Buddha means? Buddha means awake. That's all it means. Awake and undivided. Let's not use it to become divided and separate. And make the same mistake over again. The sixth patriarch was asked once, a monk asked the master, who has received the essential principles of the fifth patriarch? And the master replied, the person who understands Buddhism has received it. Have you then received it? Asked the monk. I, said the master, do not understand Buddhism. Can one not know what one is? Not know what one is? And act out of that not knowing. Not knowing what someone else is, but seeing, looking, listening, feeling. Can we lose sight of the fact that the primary work is within and thereby lose perspective? Lose perspective because we lose sight of the fact that the primary work is within. What is this within? It's another category. Work within and work without. Why do you make them two? If you look within, don't you see the whole of mankind in there? One's petty gripes and petty ambitions and the images of oneself, what one wants to be, what one doesn't want to be. In seeing that, one sees what ails all humankind. And if one human being sees this clearly, if only for one instant, I will not say what that does, because I can't, I don't really know. Because right action doesn't have this motive and that motive and this ulterior goal and that ulterior goal. No, it doesn't know what the outcome will be. But it acts. That's the trouble. We want to know what the outcome of this whole nuclear thing is going to be, don't we? And we don't know. That's a fact. But we want to know. We want to have a hand in shaping that. But we don't. The congressman and the president, they go by what they think is the consensus. There may be errors in that too, because often rich people can drum up all kinds of lists of signatures. Poor people too, for that matter. But a congressman wants to be re-elected, and to this machinery we feed our petition. To somebody who will do something because he wants to be re-elected. So we are in competition with others who may impress that congressman more. And then it's up to the president, who reads and is in contact with people, that neither you or I may ever reach, talk to, or ever be in communication with. I remember a few Thanksgivings ago, there was quite excitement. We came to one of the Sangha houses for the Thanksgiving meal, and there was great excitement. A woman from Australia had, I think, spoken, or else she herself or somebody spoke about her, I wasn't there, about this great activity in Australia to not mine uranium. I think Caldecott was her name, and she was so amazingly successful in convincing the unions not to mine uranium. Well, by now, uranium is mined in Australia. To fundamentally change, much deeper things must go on than being afraid of what something will do to me, that I may die, or that this earth may be disfigured. A horrible thought, a horrible thing. And yet, just appealing to these emotions of fear and the guilt and wanting to do something about it, that only goes so far. If one doesn't fundamentally see what brings about violence, bombs, armament, nations, religious division, and that can be studied in oneself, in one's relationship with others. There's no change through mass revolution or mass action. Change happens in individuals and in the interaction among individual people. And don't ask about the outcome. I don't know. But one works because one sees that it needs to be done. How so? What are the problems and dangers implied by not being actively aware and involved out there, quotes? Can we use practice in order to escape from the world? Well, are you? Do you? How are you practicing? There's a real questioning. Out of not knowing, there's a great sensitivity comes into being. Sensitivity about what is going on in the world. Because occasionally one needs to listen to a newscast. Somehow, or other, even if one doesn't listen to newscasts, one sort of picks it up by osmosis. People tell one about it, or one sees a headline, watches 60 Minutes or something. I don't think there's anybody here, or is there, who doesn't need to find out what's going on in the world, but not to see that as separate as what's going on in oneself. Can we get into a pattern of tending our own lives and practices so exclusively that we become tuned out to the reality of suffering? Can we get into a pattern of tending our own lives and practices so exclusively that we become tuned out to the reality of the suffering, oppression, and dangers that surrounds our relatively comfortable niche? There's always that danger. That's why I mentioned so much in Teisho, Sesshin and out of Sesshin. What is going on in this world? That's the doubt mass. How can practice be an escape from that? It's working right into that. Right in the midst of that. And seeing how one is affected by all this. What one all wants to do. How one wants to hide. How one wants to do. How one wants to secure. And how one wants to escape. And the facing of the fears, that's practice. If that isn't practice, what is? Questioning in the midst of all of that comes up. in oneself, because what comes up in oneself comes up in President Reagan and Brezhnev. And the lesser, in the hierarchies. Can we thereby unwittingly fall into practicing for ourselves alone? Can we thereby unwittingly fall into practicing for ourselves alone and here too lose perspective? There may be a time in one's life when one needs to practice for oneself alone, without any ideals and ideas about saving, liberating all sentient beings, even though one vows it. And yet one must practice alone and face this loneliness, face this aloneness, uninfluenced by all that comes up inside and outside, and quotes, the influences of our society, of our friends, of our parents, which is all the same, because they're all equally conditioned. Yet out of this practicing alone, if it's truly alone, there will come right action. The practicing alone is already right action. There's no influence. But just this urgency, this yearning to come to clarity and understanding of what divides oneself in this world, bringing everything on the brink of disaster. How developed do you have to be before you can demonstrate, talk to people, write to congressmen, and so on, with a positive effect on events and people, including oneself? I don't know. How developed do you have to be? We develop film. And when it's developed at the right point, we stick it into fixative. That was the old method. Today it's probably done electronically or something. And you fix it. And you see, that's a good development. Here, you're going to become fixated, the picture. You talk to people, don't you? Find out right now, how do you talk to people? And don't think about your development. Then you won't see the people, you only think about your development. Or you think these people aren't developed enough for me to talk to, then you won't see them either. Throw out those things. And see how one talks to people, what the motives are, how one sees the people. Does one see them? Does one listen to them? The fears that come up in the people. And when you understand something very clearly, you will talk to people. You can't help yourself. Whether somebody calls you developed or not. If you understand something and this comes up, you will speak. You also speak if you don't understand something. We talked about writing to congressmen. There's nothing wrong about putting a signature in and hoping you'll come out tops in the contest for signatures. And maybe he'll vote your way. But don't expect too much from that. Because he may be voted out, or next time somebody else may get it bigger. We talked about this. With the positive effect on events and people. What's the positive effect on people and events? We always want to have a positive effect. Something tangible. Maybe big things happen in very intangible ways. Big in quotation mark, significant, vital things. No positive effect may be visible, because all visible effect usually is just a new conditioning. You got somebody going on a new idea. Or you develop a new pattern of acting, but it's still a pattern, still a new set of habits develop and so forth. In the clarity of understanding, there's no pattern, no habit. It's always fresh, always new. Have world events snowballed so much that it is too late for anybody to really do anything, for anyone to really do anything that would matter? I don't know. Who knows? Who can answer that? Maybe it's time for this planet to blow up, for life to refresh itself. Because it's not the end of life when this little planet blows up. Not to say anything derogatory. All one needs to do is walk across this yard. These green leaves, the wind in the leaves, sunlight on the leaves, the birds taking baths in the dirt, shaking it all off. What does it mean to live peacefully on this beautiful earth, whatever's left of it, and there's still lots left of it, before we drill oil everywhere? Are we so concerned that we don't see these beautiful trees? Can't listen to the birds lovingly. Without feeling guilty. I should be doing something politically active here rather than enjoying the sunshine. And then to let go of the tree in the sunshine. Then there's no division in one's life. It just flows. Inside, outside, it's one flow. Big matters, little matters, what does it matter? One works. We didn't get to Wei Nung's words, except let's just read that one sentence in which he says, "Virtuous and learned counselors, if you have the great compassion, how can you not vow to deliver all beings without limit? But in doing so, it is not I, Wei Nung, that is delivering them. The Four Vows.